This episode of The Bill and Callie Show is brought to you by Ray's Movers and Self-Storage, offering storage solutions and all your moving needs. Well, hi everybody. Bill and I are very honored and privileged to have as our guest today the very handsome and extremely young, who makes me feel really old, House of Representatives for the state of Indiana for District 15, Chris Chyung. And Chris, welcome. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, if you could start out by maybe telling our audience a little bit about who you are and where you grew up and how you got to be here, and then also explain what is District 15, because there's probably a lot of people who don't even understand what their district is.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I'm Chris Chyung. I was born and raised in the region. I was born in Maryville and then moved to Munster, and then I live in Dyer now. So I've been here almost my entire life, and after graduating from college, I was working for a company in Chicago doing some real estate work. And it came up where kind of politics just started scratching that corner of my mind, where I was like, this is really interesting to me. I think it's really consequential over decisions that are made in government and how they affect all of us, and how I didn't feel like as an ordinary citizen that I was knowing enough about the process and I was engaged as I should have been with my elected representation. So I started getting more involved. First I started volunteering a lot more in the region, and then I started listening to people when I would meet them at these volunteer events and just at community organizing meetings to ask them about how they felt about living in Indiana, how we think we could make the region better and the state better as a whole. So I kind of thought, I'm in my 20s, it might be fun to run an election, so I'll just go ahead and do it. And frankly, no one else wanted to run for my House seat, so against my predecessor, who was an incumbent at the time. So it was something that just kind of opened up, and I thought, this is really enjoyable, and I had a great time out of it. So yeah.
Great.
So it's amazing. And aren't you the youngest elected official currently in Indiana?
I'm the youngest in the General Assembly.
The General Assembly, okay.
Yeah.
All right, wow, man.
I think it's amazing, though, that somebody that young decides, I want to make a difference in the world. I'm going to get out there and really do something.
Yeah, I know. It's something that not enough of our generation does. I think I'll revise that. I think actually we do it kind of in our own ways. We have ways to do it through activism, or through the business community, or through elected office. So everyone kind of has their own channels that they can do to make their communities better. But I think on the elected side that our representation is not really representative of the people of the state or of the region as a whole. We don't have enough young people at the table, enough people who are the children of immigrants, people who are people of color, and other communities that need to be involved in the discussion more. I'm not saying that that's just that's the only thing that we have to strive for in elected office, but it's certainly an important thing.
Absolutely.
I think.
So everybody's voice is represented.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
and everyone has at least feel that they have a voice, and that someone is listening to them. Now, besides all this, I was reading through your biography, and I see that you do quite a bit of volunteer work on top of all this.
Yeah. So I got involved through Habitat for Humanity, the Restore in Gary, and then I was involved as a court-appointed special child advocate for the county. They run a great CASA program out of the county office in Crown Point, and they and they advocate for a lot of the kids who have to go through the foster system, or who have to be placed in home care, or other things, and they get taken away from their parents because their parents are abusing drugs, all kinds of things that are unfortunately becoming more of a reality in our region especially. And then I'm also involved with the Welcome Network a little bit in our area. They're a great charity run out of Hammond, and it's a faith-based refugee services, kind of immigrant services as well, organization.
Wonderful.
So yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So why don't we get to it and tell us a bit about what went on this session?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll speak about my district a little too, because I think I forgot to answer that part.
Yeah,
but
where is your
the
district
boundaries
exactly?
of the
Right,
district. Yeah.
So there are 100 state representatives in Indiana, and so the state is carved into 100 different districts. District 15, where I represent, is Dyer, Cherville, parts of St. John, and parts of Griffith. And basically, I am the voice for 65,000 people in the House of Representatives for the state. So if anyone is having any problems with their Medicaid, which is administered through the state, or dealing with a certain agency like INDOT, or getting answers out of the Department of Veterans Affairs or out of DCS, then please just call our office, and that's our job. We're supposed to have that constituent services side, and we have running cases at any given time of helping constituents get where they need to go, and being a bridge between the citizen and all the state government, which can be so vast and hard to navigate at times.
Absolutely. The website, sometimes you go to it and my eyes just get crossed, and
Yeah.
I can't figure it out.
Yeah, it's tough for sure. I mean, but in the session as well, so we just wrapped up at the end of April our session. The state of Indiana sets a biennial budget every 2 years, so every odd year is when we're doing budget work. We had to decide how to allocate basically $34.6 billion over the next 2 years, and you can imagine how much tug-of-war goes on.
I can imagine.
Yeah. There's
Now they could give that all to the Bill and Kelly show, and we can make that determination
That'd be nice.
for the state of
that'll
Indiana.
happen.
Yeah, write a blank check.
Right,
Why not?
exactly. Why not?
But we have to deal with funding needs and how those change over time in regards to road infrastructure, which is such an important thing up here in Northwest Indiana. I'm on the Roads and Transportation Committee in the House, so we try to make sure we get work done to make sure the funding gets to where it needs to go. I just wrapped up a series of town hall meetings with the community, and we invited a spokesman from INDOT to come out and explain their projects, explain their reasoning.
That's
because
great.
Yeah, I think so too, because everyone kind of feels like when they're driving that, why doesn't INDOT do something this way?
Yeah.
We all kind of feel like armchair transportation engineers, when in reality the experts who I trust, because we have a great working relationship with INDOT, at least my office does, they're very transparent about how they're spending the money, how they're allocating the time to each project, and things that might not be immediately apparent to just regular folks driving on the road is very well researched on their end, in my opinion. So we just try to make it, again, just frictionless between the citizen and the state government. But besides road funding, education funding was a huge part of the fights that we had at the State House, for lack of a better word. It's a big part of our budget, but we want to make sure that we're funding education that's top quality education in the state of Indiana. We know that we have the lowest paid teachers in the entire Midwest, which is something that we should not be proud of. We've got to put a direct line item to raise these teacher salaries, because even though the cost of living might be low in the state of Indiana, we still have issues recruiting teachers, getting graduates who are not much younger than myself to go into the teaching profession, because the pay is a fraction of what you can make if you don't get, a bachelor's and a master's and all the certifications.
And teachers buy so many things for their classrooms out of their own money
Right,
so
right.
often. I know,
Yeah. And that shouldn't happen
No.
anymore.
And actually, I understand if we lived in a state that was in a deficit, it would be one thing to understand, but the state is still running a surplus, which is difficult for a teacher to go out and do these things knowing the state is running a surplus. So we appreciate your efforts to be an advocate for education,
Right.
public education, because I think no better time than now. It needs a big advocate.
Oh,
So we
absolutely.
appreciate everything you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah. Everything that we do is trying to shore up the education system in the state of Indiana. When I graduated from high school in 2011 from Munster.
Yeah, I know.
Not to age anybody.
Yeah.
Sorry. But even when I was back in school, we had funding year to year, not referendum to referendum, and
Right.
people are getting more frustrated about the whole depending on the referendum. It used to kind of be a supplement, and now it's a crutch. It's totally a crutch for the school corporations, because they're dependent on this money, and we've got to make sure that we allocate it the right way. We don't want to have our tax money going towards virtual schools and charter schools that are failing year after year, which is some of the things that we've seen.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in the state of Indiana, is that these companies will sometimes pop up and then they'll fold a few years later, but then pop up under a completely different LLC. So we want to prevent any of those kinds of abuses, because those kinds of bad actors are not entitled to our tax money by any means. And I'm not against private education. I'm against the way that we fund it in such a public manner. It's basically really crossing boundaries between the public side and the private side, and getting so kind of intertwined that it's hard to distinguish the two, and that shouldn't be the case with our tax money, is what I believe.
Yeah. So, and that's and again, the whole idea of public education is fair access for all,
Right.
Not people who can afford the education, but and really those private schools and even the voucher system allows some of those students to move over to those schools if there's something going on that they don't like about the school that they're attending, which creates another problem for public education, because every ADM count, that's how the school is allocated the amount of money.
Exactly.
And if we have students moving over to a private school, that takes dollars right out of their budget. So, I mean, not only the referendum, forcing them to go to referendum since the tax caps took place, but it's also that competition that they've never had to deal with before. And that I know, going on the other side of the fence, that's what everyone thought was going to be a good idea, setting up competition so we have a better education. But I think we've proven pretty much that does not always work in the education sector. It's not like the business world.
Right, yeah, and there was a great Notre Dame study, I think it was released in 2017, that measured directly the public schools versus the non-public schools, and the outcomes were almost indistinguishable, and in some cases the non-publics were performing substantially worse in certain areas of reading and math. So there are definitely areas where we know, and we have the data that proves that we know how to fund a proper education system. And it's honestly about the 21st century economy. It's not just about public schools at this point, but training up my generation and everyone younger than myself to compete in the global economy is something that we didn't have to face in decades ago after World War II, when we were the only superpower essentially in the world, whereas now everyone is developing, and we've got to fight talent from Asia and from Europe and from other countries that have come such a long way in making those strides. So we hope we can do something good for the 21st century economy, for sure.
So, anything else that happened in the session?
Oh yeah. Oh yes.
I can imagine.
Now say before we close out the show?
Well, if anyone wants to get in touch with my office about speaking about any bills or about even any regional kind of development issues, I ran in this race because it was important for me to see young people represented at the table, young people in my entire district, of course, but making sure that we could attract people back to the region is something that's a top priority of mine. I mean, all of my friends who I graduated with from Munster are in the big cities now. They're not coming back to Northwest Indiana because of the quality of life issues. Even though the cost of living is low, they can make higher wages elsewhere. They're not coming back to raise families or start businesses or start families, and that's something that really is a concern for me in the future. So I'm hoping that through some work I'm doing outside of my legislative work, we're trying to get a group together of young people in Lake County to be more minded about the future and how we can plan out our next moves and make this place a better place to live for everybody.
Let us know about that so we can let other people know about what's going on.
Yeah, stay tuned.
Absolutely.
I mean, this, the thing is, this is the Rust Belt, but the problem with being the Rust Belt is we are so tied to the economy that's directly related to steel production. My gosh, we should have learned that lesson in the 70s and the 80s with all the layoffs and the up-down, and now we have tariffs to add on to that. They just are talking about shuttering a blast furnace at Gary Works. And it seems like it would be appropriate to develop an industry in this area, more high-tech, that would draw, so we don't have a brain drain of pulling all these young, talented people away to Chicago, to Indianapolis. I mean, the data center is an excellent example in Hammond. I was so happy to see them develop something that was independent of the steel industry, or nothing that's wrong with blue collar. They still need those jobs, for crying out loud. But that we do have young people wanting a better life and moving out, and it's got to stop the
Find a way to keep them
brain drain.
Yeah. you know.
So, but,
Perfect. Thank
well,
you,
gosh.
Chris, so much for
Thank you.
coming on our show
Thank
and
you for
sharing
having
all
me.
this with
And
everybody.
thank you for the good work that you're doing.
Absolutely.
A freshman, you're kicking it, buddy.
Thank
you're
you.
kicking it.
Thanks
We're
so
proud
much.
of you. So,
Absolutely.
with that, we'll say goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye for now.
This episode of The Bill and Callie Show is brought to you by Ray's Movers and Self-Storage, offering storage solutions and all your moving needs.